Good morning, everyone. Welcome to OLC4O. I am your instructor, Mike Laverty, and today is December 22nd, 2022, 3 days before Christmas. Today is class number 24. This will be our last class before we break for the holidays, and we're still covering assignments in Unit 3, Lesson 13. So we're going to go back and have a look at assignment 35 and 37. And maybe even 38 if we've got time. So we are in week 6 of classes in we're in week 6 of classes in term 1B. There'll be no classes from December 26th to January 5th. So the office will close today at 12 p.m. December 22nd, and then we'll come back and we'll have 3 more weeks. We'll have week 7, 8, and 9 when we come back in January 2023, and then the last day of class, the last class of week 9 will be January 26th. That'll be the last and final broadcast for this class in this term. So we've covered Unit 1, covered Unit 2. We'll almost finish week 3, Unit 3 today, but we'll come back and a little bit of week 7 will be dedicated to Unit 3. And then once we've got Unit 3 done, we'll finish Unit 4 and leave plenty of time for the final exam. Right, so during week 9, we'll give you lots of prep for that final exam. So we're going to look at lots of examples. We'll have a look at some sample questions from previous years. And then we'll look at some mock, assignments that'll be on that final exam. So as I've mentioned a few times, you'll either write a final exam, so you either do the exam or you'll do a culminating activity. So in order to write an exam, you've got to have somebody in your community invigilate, proctor it, just be in the room while you write it. So if that can't be arranged, then you have to do the culminating activity. But the exam and the culminating activity are very similar, and there's no surprises. It covers material from all of the previous the lessons and the assignments. So like any course, the final exam is an assessment of the skills you've learned and the knowledge you've picked up. A final exam should not be throwing any new information at you. It should only be testing stuff that you've been studying the past, weeks or months or however long that course might be. So up on the board there, if you want to pause that, if you're on YouTube, those are the ways you can watch the course live. As I've mentioned many times, I see my subscribers slowly ticking up, so that's cool. So subscribe to the video, share it on Facebook. I'll do the same. If you search Laverty Wassa on YouTube, you'll find me, and you'll find some playlists. And all of the classes are up there. So after today, you will find 24 classes arranged in chronological order and also arranged by unit. If you want to pause that screen, if you're watching on YouTube, that's how you can submit your work. And if you have any questions on how to do that, best practices, what's the best way to hand in work, just talk to me, talk to your DEC, talk to your learning center, phone the Wassa office. Here's how you want to get in touch with me. So over the holiday break, if you do have a question, I would suggest sending it here. I will sporadically check my email and Facebook. I will not be checking my phone. So after today and going into January, I would not suggest phoning these phone numbers because I will not get it, but I will check my email every couple of days, and I'll check my messenger as well. So that's my office hours, so those won't really apply for the next 2 weeks. So here's your next step, so and where you should be right now. So you should have read all of Unit 1 and 2. So Unit 1 and Unit 2 should be wrapped up at this point for you. You should have read the first 2/3 of Unit 3. You should have all of Unit 1 and 2 completed, all the assignments by now, and you should be making a plan for completing assignments 30 and beyond. So I know a lot of people are registered as independent learners, and your timelines are a little different because you register in September and you have all the way until June to finish up your assignments. But I think it's good to just stay on task and to complete your assignments almost as if you're registered in a term. So it's best to kind of keep them consistent, keep working on it, because your skills are going to build up and what you learned in the previous unit is going to pay off. And then what's going to happen is if you leave this stuff until March, April, May, then you're going to scramble and you're just going to throw a whole bunch of stuff at me, and I'm going to struggle to keep up with it and to give you feedback in a timely manner. So as I've mentioned many times in this course, learning to be a writer really comes down to learning to be an editor. And you can't learn to be an editor unless you have corrected your mistakes and the mistakes of other people, right? So I think that's probably the best formula for becoming a better writer. And of course, if you want to be a better writer, you got to be a better reader. But if you want to write, you got to learn how to edit. And you need to edit your own work, and you need to edit other people's work. So that's how it's done. You only get better by recognizing your own mistakes and your own limitations and addressing them. So, and I think that pretty much applies to every facet of life on this planet, right? You're only going to get better at something if you can take an honest look at it and work on improving it. So that goes with relationships, with families, with your passions, being an athlete, being a musician, being an artist, being an office manager, whatever your thing is, you're gonna make mistakes, and you have to learn how to recognize them and to make them better. So today's lesson, we'll do the words of the day, look at a headline, focus on assignments 35 and 37, and then hopefully, if we have time, we'll look at assignment 38. But if not, that's where we'll pick up in the new year. So we're going to review the writing process, and today we're composing a news report. Assignment 35, so that is, if you've read the assignment guidelines, what you're doing is you're doing a very close reading of Chapter 9 of Jimmy Comes Home, and then you're writing a news report based off of what you read in that chapter. You're looking at examples of resumes to create a model for your own. And assignment 38, we're using a graphic organizer. So that is the planning process. Planning is step one. So step one of the writing process is where we plan. It's where we create outlines. And that outline is going to be different depending on whatever we're writing. So throughout this course, we'll demonstrate and introduce a few of these tools. One of them is called a graphic organizer, right? So we're going to use that. We've used a similar one going back to Unit 1. We use the spider diagram. And that's one that is typically used in like an elementary school. They give it to students in grades 1 and 2 when they're writing their first stories. But it's something that you don't abandon as you get older. It's not like you just become a writer and you just forget about stuff like that. So it's good to have that beginner mind and to have those planning tools because they're useful. Doesn't matter if you're 6, 7, or 47, 87. These tools are very important. And they give you a roadmap. They give you a roadmap for your writing. So these exercises are very useful. And if you use them, I think you'll be surprised at the results you get. So you'll know you're successful if you can write a news report using the writing process and doing a close reading, right? So usually when you study literature, if you take an English course, for example, like after you're done OLC4O, you might want to take grade 11 or grade 12 English, and then you'll study a novel or a short story. And what most people do they simply just sit down with the book and they read the chapter, they read the poem, they read the short story, and they don't make any notes. They just simply take it in, and you just read it. Then you put it down, and then when you come back to it the second time, you're coming back to it with a strategy. So we've talked in this course about we have before reading strategies, so we can ask ourselves questions before we read something. We can ask ourselves questions while we read something, and then after we read it, right? So we come back, we do a close reading, and then we pick up details that we may have missed the first time. So we take a deeper, closer look. Second success criteria, we'll create a chronological resume. So we're going to look at different kinds of resumes today. And chronological. So again, I love the origins of words and looking at them. I think I've spelled chrono wrong. That is, no, I spelled chronological right. So chronological is to do with time and you know, logos. Logos means reason. So something that it follows an order by time. So that's chronological. So the chronological resume is to do with time, and in this case, it's to do with listing your most recent jobs first. And then you'll be successful if you can use a graphic organizer to create an outline for an information paragraph. So up on the board, I've got 3 comics. They are related to journalism because we're going to spend some time talking with a news report. The first one says, today everyone protested everything everywhere. So I love that one. Middle one, we've got a little fish, sort of looks like Nemo's dad or Nemo. It's even got the coral reef there. And he says, look out, Trump is a threat to journalism. And then, of course, we've got the big shark. And the big shark is emblematic of Google and Facebook. So this is another example of a political cartoon where someone is expressing an opinion, but it's sort of hidden behind a joke or a cartoon, right? So basically, the argument here is that we can complain all we want about Trump being a threat to journalism, but the real threat to journalism are these big corporate giants like Google and Facebook, who arguably have a huge, a massive amount of impact on how people get the news and how people read the news, right? So traditionally, like going back 20, 30 years ago, there was newspapers and there was big network television, and they controlled how people got information. But now it's companies like Google and Facebook that have the most influence on how people get information and what information they're seeing. And on the right, we've got the editor of the newspaper saying, I'm looking for a reporter who is imaginative. I did just say investigative, didn't I? So I love that joke. That one's really clever. They're making a joke, and the joke here is that the reporter is supposed to hear things and then sort of change them when he writes it down, right? So especially your boss, right? You want to make your boss look good. So and that is, it goes to the heart of, a lot of newspapers, a lot of network television. They're rarely just giving you information. So ideally, they're supposed to be unbiased. They're supposed to be neutral. But it's very hard to just give information in a 100% neutral way. The order that you give the information kind of puts a slant on it. You can give somebody just strict information, and that information can have no bias on it, but you might cut out a few details. And the stuff that you cut out is going to really change how somebody reads that story, right? Or the headline you give, right? So it's really hard to be neutral 100%. And as a writer, whether as a journalist or a researcher or someone who is just writing English papers, you have to be very careful with your words, because how you present them can really shift the meaning of what you're saying, right? So language matters, and it's a tricky business. But that's why we're here. We're to investigate language and to see how it works and to look at the deeper meanings of it and the kind of the mechanisms and how it all plays out. So here's our words of the day. Our Anishinaabe-Moan word is inutage. I kind of put a French slant on that, but it's a verb. Inutage. She or he quotes people, reports what people say. And of course, the English equivalent would be quote, is repeat or copy out words from a text or speech written or spoken by another person. From the Latin quote, which means how many. And then this sort of goes back to the origins of language as we know it. So the oldest language, the oldest written language that we can find, produced by human beings, often had to do with just counting stuff. You know, how many horses, how many sheep, how many goats, how many bushels of hay, how many people, right? So a lot of our initial writing had to do with just counting how many of something there was. We would just simply, so that's the origins of the word quote. And even today, when you give somebody a quote, like in a business setting, it's like you want them to perform a service, you want them to do something for you. They give you a quote and they tell you how much they think it's going to cost. And that quote is like a general figure. And then, you know, you might agree with that quote, might disagree with it. And then they'll send you an invoice for a definite amount that you owe somebody. But that's the origins of the word. It means how many. Another word that kind of comes to mind is quota. So a quota is like a specific number that has to be met. It's how many of something has to happen. So some people in their job, they have a quota. They have to do so many of something. I used to work for a call center in Winnipeg. It's probably my least favorite job I've ever done. And that was just cold calling people and just asking them questions, trying to complete surveys. And if I wanted to keep my job, I had a quota. So I don't remember the number. It's been too long, but every hour I had to have so many successful completions. That was my quota. How many? So here's a couple of more words. Baba majimo is a verb, which is she or he spreads the news about. Dadiji bajimo is a verb which she or he tells stories, reports, right? So we see that ajimo part of the word, which we've seen is related to the word for story in the Anishinaabe-Moan language, right? So that root story is there. So it's like all languages on planet Earth, it's made up of little pieces. And when you know what the pieces mean, you can sort of start to understand the language and start to make connections. So the human brain loves patterns, and we love patterns, and we love to make networks. Your whole brain is just a series of networks. And one way of looking at language is kind of like a web. And there's no one word that's just out there by itself. Every word in the language is networked in and connected to other language. And they all exist sort of in little clusters and little families that belong to bigger families. So every word about stories and storytelling and spreading information is going to be in like a little network in the Anishinaabe-Moan language, in the English language, in French, in Russian, in Ukrainian, whatever the case may be. It's going to be the same. Here's a couple of English words. We've got journalism, which is the occupation of reporting, writing, editing, photographing, broadcasting news, or of conducting any news organization as a business, from the Latin diurnalus, which means daily. So you may have heard the word nocturnal. So a nocturnal animal is one that is typically active during nighttime or in the evening. A diurnal animal, which is a human, because most humans are active during the day. So that's that root of that word, diurnalist. So I think journalism, the roots of the word go back to something you would do every day, something you would report on every day. So like a daily newspaper, that kind of thing. A witness is a noun, is an individual who, being present, personally sees or perceives a thing, a beholder, a spectator, or an eyewitness. From the Old English, so wit is mental capacity, and ness is a root word that means action or a state of being, right? So the word witness just literally means somebody who has mental capacity and has like a sharp mind. They're a witness. That's the origins of the word. So here's our article of the day from the Globe and Mail. That's my favorite newspaper. I read it every day. I read it, and I also have it. It also reads stories to me, which I love. It'll actually read articles to me if I'm laying in bed or if I'm doing my dishes and I don't feel like actually reading. It'll actually read these things to me, which I love. So the headline is CSIS briefed Trudeau that China targeted federal candidates in 2019 election, but no evidence of covert funding. So there's our leader, Prime Minister Trudeau, and Chinese President Xi Jinping. This man right here, that's the president of China, at the APEC summit in Bangkok, Thailand on November 18th. So this topic, it's been around for a long time. So governments around the world love to tamper and meddle with elections of other countries. You know, America's been doing it for many, many years, and we saw with the when Trump was elected in 2016, there was lots of allegations that the Russians had meddled with the election, and so now we've got allegations that China has been meddling with our elections. So the Chinese government is trying to ensure that certain candidates get elected in Canada. So I'm not sure why they would want certain candidates, but the report certainly looks like that's the case here. So here's our headline with our nouns in blue, conjunctions in purple, verbs. Verbs are in green, nouns are in blue, conjunctions are in purple, prepositions in red, adjectives in orange. CSIS, of course, stands for the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. So in America, you have the FBI, which is responsible for domestic threats to America, threats that happen inside the country. And then you have the CIA, which is responsible for threats that come to America from abroad, from other countries. In Canada, we have a combined agency. So CSIS is sort of like our combined FBI, CIA, and they are responsible for identifying threats within Canada. And then, of course, in this example, they're looking at threats that are coming from outside of Canada. So CSIS is a noun, you know. It's an acronym. It's a short form. So what did they do? They briefed Trudeau. So again, that's a mononym. It's a one name. We don't need to say Justin Trudeau. We know we're talking about the Prime Minister of Canada. All we need to do is say Trudeau. CSIS briefed Trudeau that. So in this case, that is a conjunction that combines the first three words with the next ones. Chinese targeted candidates, right? So the Chinese, that's a noun, refers to the whole country. What do? They targeted candidates. In is a preposition, so in, out, during, while, these are prepositions. They tell us where something is, why it's happening, where it's happening. So it wasn't just any election. It was the 2009 election, so that's a adjective-noun combo. But no evidence. So no is a word that modifies evidence. No evidence of covert funding was found, right? So So what that means is that, according to this report, the Chinese are trying to influence who got elected, but there's no evidence that they actually gave money to candidates, which would just be a huge story. You know, if we had evidence that the Chinese is actually giving candidates money, that'd be a huge story in Canada. So they may be trying to meddle with the election, and they're probably trying to find people that are sympathetic to the Chinese government and won't kind of give them a hard time. There's the article. We'll have a brief look at it. So we got the apostrophe S. So something that belongs to China had targeted 11 candidates. Now here's one to have a look at, right? So the numbers 1 through 10, you typically spell out, okay? 1, 2, 3, up to 10. If something is larger than 10, that's when you start putting the number, right? So so that's typically how you do that when you're writing. You actually spell out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then numbers 11 and higher, you write them out as numerals. Okay. Sources say David Vigneault, Director of Canadian Security Intelligence Service, provided the briefing to Mr. Trudeau and his National Security Advisor, Jody Thomas. Weeks later, in November, Mr. Trudeau met Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Group of 20 summit in Indonesia. So we've got an example of some additional information. So they've used commas to do that. They could have used brackets, but in this case they use commas to block off the additional information, and complained to him about interference in Canadian domestic affairs. So again, we've got the comma and the and, right? So anytime we use one of those conjunctions, the word and is a conjunction. It's a building block piece that combines elements of two sentences. Mr. Trudeau was informed in the briefing that there was no evidence of Chinese money secretly flowing to the 11 candidates, all of whom were running in the Greater Toronto area. So we've got an example of a comma followed by some additional info. So the most important part of that sentence is that there's no money flowing to the candidates. The additional info is that they were all running in the GTA. All right, so just given time constraints, we'll move on. So in exercise 4 of assignment 35, you are asked to submit a rough copy and a final copy of your news report. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about how we do that, right? So we may so what you're gonna do here is you're gonna write a news report about what happens to Gary in chapter 9 of your novel. There may be some details you have to make up. There's lots in there, but be sure that your story flows and makes sense. Use the rubric to help guide your writing. All right, so when we're doing a close reading, we want to flip open our book here. And we have chapter 9. Chapter 9. Chapter 9, which is called Through the Ice. So what we're going to do is we're going to do step 1. We're going to plan this thing out, okay? So if I'm writing an article in the newspaper and my source material is chapter 9 of Jimmy Comes Home, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip through this thing and just make a list of, this is what happened, right? So what happened, okay? So Jimmy preps his machine. Okay, so Jimmy gets his machine ready, okay? You know, then he gets to the lake. Remember, I'm just doing point form. It doesn't have to make sense. Or it has to make sense, but it doesn't have to be grammatically correct. He sees lights. Then what happens? So we asked to... so he sees lights on the lake, and then he sees one machine. You know, there's one machine chased by two. And then he kind of asks himself, you know, what should I do here? Should I go here? So Gary's being chased. And then we find out that Gary's machine goes under. Jimmy talks to the cops. Jimmy rescues Gary, right? He gets to Gary. He tries to rescue him, and then okay, then we got Debbie, who is Teresa's cousin. So Debbie informs Teresa. Okay. Okay, so Jimmy and the police try to warm up Gary. Okay, and then let's see. So Teresa arrives on the scene. You know, but I'll just say they drive. They drive Jimmy to Green Star Lake, okay? And then we've got some stuff at the end here about and then we got the end of the story where you know, Jimmy's out of the hospital. He didn't die, but he's kind of feeling really down on himself, and you know, that's the stuff that comes after. That's our additional information, right? So what I would suggest to do is, you know, just do that. Step one is just plan it out. Find out what happens, and then you're going to talk about what happens. That's step one. You're going to do your planning, right? And then step two, this is where you're going to write. And then I would just say, you know, try to write a catchy. Why do my C's always do that? Try to write a catchy headline. Maybe choose three details. Choose three details that you think are the most important, right? So you're going to write a headline. You're going to choose 3 details. So pick 3 of these details you think are the most important, the ones that the writers need to hear. So maybe the fact that Jimmy put gas in the snow machine, it's not super important. Right? So find the ones you find that you believe are the most important, right? So, and then you'll write a sentence for each detail, and then maybe write 1 quote. Right, so get a quote for each detail. For each detail, or, you know, or about each detail. And then maybe try to write an ending / some additional info. Okay. Let's go back to let's see. Let's do there. Oops. I always forget. How do I erase the whole page? Well. All good. So step 1, we're just simply writing down all the stuff that happened. Chronological order, not worried about it. Then we get a headline. And then once we've written a headline and we've got a sentence about each paragraph, and we've got a sentence about each detail, a quote about each detail, then maybe what we want to do is we want to go into our revision process. So step 3, we're going to do our revision process. And what I would consider doing is having your information triangle. Okay? And so maybe just block it out. You know? So write your headline and block out your lead paragraph, right? So our headline and our lead paragraph, that's going to be our most important, right? So write your headline, and remember, this is like 5 to 10 words. It's your hook. Hook your readers in. Okay, your lead paragraph should be who and what happened. And then you're going to have your middle paragraphs. And this is where you're going to talk about how it happened. So how it went down. And then you're going to have your quotes in here too. So we're talking about how it went down, getting some quotes, and then we're going to have our final paragraph. Might be 1 or 2. And in our final paragraphs, we're going to have some additional info. and then maybe a conclusion, or, you know, what happens next. And that's going to be the bottom of our information paragraph, right? So so step 3, you're going to revise this thing, and you're going to go, and again, I need a headline, I need a lead paragraph, I need a middle couple of paragraphs, and some additional info about what happens, right? So tell us who or what happened. You know, what's the story about? You know, your lead paragraph should explain the headline. And then your second paragraph should tell us how it went down, give us some quotes from some people, and then your final paragraph should give us a conclusion, an end of the story for now, and some additional info. All right, so that's how I would approach that assignment, okay? And you can also look back at the template because you've already written a news report. And so look back at that template to see how they wrote it. You know, your lead paragraph should also who and what and when, right? That should also be in there too, right? So who, what, and when. Those are the 3 most important of the W's. Who, what, and when. And then how and why come later, right? How and why are over here. So who, what, when. Where is going to be kind of somewhere in the middle, right? So between here and here. But who, what, and when is probably the most important things. And then where it happened and why it happened and how it happened are going to come second in the information paragraph. You know, the where might even be in your headline, right? So at some point you should mention Green Star Lake. That's probably going to be in your headline or come into the lead paragraph. And then once you have your outline in, you might go back, do some more writing, or you might do some revision depending on where you are in the process. Okay, so let's have a look at the resume. So there's many ways you can write a resume. And they basically come down to these 3 categories. There's a chronological resume. There is a functional, or what is sometimes referred to as a skills-based resume. And there's a combination resume, which is, of course, a combination, a mix of a chronological and a functional resume. So the chronological resume, as the name suggests, chrono means time, is the most recent positions are listed first. So this is the resume that is the most common, and it's one that most employers expect to see because they want to see where you worked before or where you're working right now. They want to see that stuff first. Your most recent stuff comes first, and the stuff in the past comes later. So they want to see your work experience, and they also want to see your training and education. But again, that training and education is going to be listed in chronological order too, sort of like reverse chronological, where the most recent stuff comes first, and then you go into the past from there. Your functional one is when your skills are featured. They're highlighted before your work experience, and this is usually when you've got some gaps in your employment record where you didn't work for a while or for whatever reason, and then you're trying to highlight your skills before you highlight your work experience. So what we're talking about here is a chronological resume. And when you write a chronological resume, this is the format. This is the order, okay? So you start with your name and address. You give the employer your objective, what you want. You tell them your education or your work experience. So sometimes these are reversed order. You might put your work experience first. You might put your education first. You're probably going to open with whichever one is stronger. So if you think that your education and your training is stronger, then you want to put that one first. So education / training. But if you feel that your work experience is stronger, then you lead with that. Then your skills, then your interests, then your references. And so think about this. It's the same information paragraph. Sorry, information pyramid. The most important stuff is coming first, right? So name, objective, that's the bulk of the pyramid, right? Your skills and your interests are important, and your references. So it's not that the references are the least important, but your employer is going to focus on your training and your work experience first. If they like what they see, they're going to keep reading to get down to your skills. So your skills are important, but your interests are less important, right? Your interests aren't going to get you hired in the same way that your work experience will. So let's have a look at the document itself. So you got two options here. Your name and address can be centered at the top of the page, or they can be put on the left-hand margin, right? So we call this the justification. So left-hand justification is when you can draw a straight line, and then all of the, let's see if I can draw a better line than that. All of the, that's marginally better, pun intended. So that's when all of the letters are pushed against that left-hand side, whereas the top one, the words are centered. So pick one or the other. Put them at the center, center top or left top. That's your name and your address. Then we're going to do, sorry, I didn't realize my arrow was blocking everything. Then you're going to talk about your objective, and this is basically, it's what you want. So here's an example. Objective is to apply my skills in a community-based organization committed to the well-being of young people, right? So this is the sample resume from our course material. So an objective is good, right? Sometimes with your objective, you might want to say, like, I'm looking for full-time work. I'm looking for permanent work, Tell the person how serious you are, what you want out of life, my objective is to become a teacher. My objective is to work with youth. My objective is to make a difference in my community, right? So it's a statement. It's got to be short. So your objective is short, but it's very focused. It should be powerful, and it should be immediate. I'm pretty sure in this course I've mentioned the concept of the elevator pitch, and the elevator pitch is when you are in an elevator and there's one of your personal heroes is standing beside you. So I read about this in a book about screenplay writing. So let's say Quentin Tarantino or Martin Scorsese or Jordan Peele, like your idol is in the elevator, and you have 10 seconds to pitch them an idea, right? That's the elevator pitch, right? So you have to give them a short, focused, powerful. You got to give them a hook, right? So you got to be really specific, very focused. And this is the kind of the answer, why do you want to work here? Well, the reason I want to work here is because I want to work with youth, and I want to use my skills in a community-based organization. So we have just ignore that. You have your education. So again, it's we're listing things If we're being technical, it is reverse chronological order. So most recent to oldest, right? So start with the most recent and go to the oldest, right? So you want to list your most recent stuff and go to your oldest stuff. So 2022 Ontario Secondary School Diploma, right? That's your high school. Followed by, first aid training that you received in 2021. You don't really need to mention the month it happened. Your employer is not really going to care about the month you got the training. They're going to want to know about the order, and they're going to want to know how old, right? So, especially like first aid. Like if you got first aid in 2010, you wouldn't list it because it's out of date by now. You want to list the most recent stuff that's come up, right? So, and then the same thing goes for your the same thing goes for your this is your education. The same thing's going to apply for your work experience. So we don't have time to finish this off. We will come back to this in 2023. We'll polish up our resumes, get off to a good start. So thanks for tuning in. Happy holidays, happy new year. We'll see you in 2023.